Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Inner Join. It's a live show where I dive into the topics of data discovery and data governance. I'm Shinji Kim, your host of Inner Join from SelectStar. SelectStar is a modern data catalog, lineage, and governance platform. And today I have Kasia Rachuta from Square, who's currently a data science tech lead. Kasia, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So to begin, I would love to learn a little bit more about you, how you got into data, and how you got to where you are at Square.
Yeah, of course. So, as mentioned, I currently work at Square. I'm a data science tech lead on our identity platform. So, as you may guess, we do identity verifications of our merchants. It's a fintech, so this is a regulatory requirement. So how I got into data. So during college, I did a few internships in social impact measurement, which is quite quantitative. I ended up doing a master's in theoretical physics. I really wanted to challenge myself. Initially, I also thought I wanted to go into academia. I later realized this was not the path for me. But during that training, I was required to analyze large quantities of data, and this all gave me a really great foundation to build a data career upon. We also learned coding. It was in like MATLAB and Mathematica and some C++ during studies, so it wasn't quite Python or SQL. But it all gave me really great foundation. And my first data job was at a tiny company called Unidol. It was about 10 to 15 people. And then after that, I moved into 5 stars. I had a mentor. I learned a lot there. Then I worked at Medium. And then 5.5 years ago, I started at Square on a very different team. So in total at Square, I've been on 4 different teams, both as an IC and as a people manager. So I got to try out different parts of the business. I got to learn about different parts of the business, and I got to try out different flavors of data within that.
Very cool. Can you share a little bit more about what you've done with data in different teams at Square in your 5-year tenure there so far?
Yeah, so my first team was mobile app platform. That was very much looking at the experience of a developer at Square, mobile developer at Square specifically. So I had to dive deep into what a flaky test is. So if you ever see your PR fail the test and then you rerun it and the test passes, that means the test is flaky. That's not a good thing. So
Mm,
we're working on fixing things like that. We're looking at how many dependencies different modules within the code base had. So it was all very technical.
wow. So it's for the engineering teams to set different KPIs, internal goals on improving their software, and you are helping them to come up with the right KPIs and how to measure it.
Yes, exactly. And the goal was to just make sure that the developers can be as efficient as possible.
Mhm.
Because at the time, we would see that they sometimes had to like wait up to an hour for the test to pass and sit idle, which is not a great thing to happen. So we're looking at things like that. I knew that I wanted to look at an external customer at Square eventually. So that's when I moved teams. I moved to e-commerce at the beginning of pandemic. I was interviewing with the team before the pandemic. It just so happened, and then the pandemic hit, and it was a really great time to be on the team as they were growing really fast. Had so much work. Um, and I was working with 3 product managers there. So we're working on making the onboarding and activation faster and more efficient, and helping Square merchants get on Square Online as fast as possible.
Mm.
So we're doing a lot of A/B testing there, a lot of deep dives, some work with machine learning engineers. It was really fun. Then I work on the actual website editor, so where our merchants can set up their page. Again, some A/B testing, but a lot of infrastructure work. So the data was like semi-structured, pretty messy. So one of my bigger projects was to revamp our infrastructure. And I also worked on our photo studio product where Square merchants could send us products And we'll take professional pictures for them, and we're trying to figure out how is this product working, how is it performing. So a lot of like measurement, but also deep dives and helping figure out strategy going forward. And that was really fun, just looking at, well, are pictures really helping Square merchants? um, After that, I spent almost 2 years on the e-commerce team, and then I moved to sales analytics. I wanted to be a people lead, so I actually switched career ladders. So I moved away from data science to business intelligence analytics. Um,
Mm,
and the goal was there to move the team away from being reactive, having a Jira queue of over 1,000 tickets when I started, um, to being more strategic partners. But first, we had to build up all of the reporting. We had to work very closely with both data engineering team, and we had to build that ourselves, and had to have solid infrastructure where we would be able to do that work efficiently. So there was a lot of ad hoc work, a lot of ad hoc queries, um, some data living in spreadsheets still, which is pretty horrifying. Uh,
yeah, I'd
and
love to learn about more about. Did you guys ever completed the queue of 1,000 Jira tickets, or did they just
uh,
not? Yeah.
so we never completed them. I was able to close out quite a lot of them. So I spent like the first month going through those tickets, and a lot of them were asked from people who have already left, or the questions were irrelevant.
Oh.
I also ended up taking them and like identifying themes. What are the things that people are asking over and over again? What
Mhm.
basic reports can we build so that people stop asking the same questions?
Yeah.
Um, and I also made an executive decision that any ticket older than, I don't know if it was a year or 6 months, I can't remember now, but I was closing those tickets. I was like,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
this is
it's not
expired.
relevant anymore. Yeah, it's a while ago. If it's so important, they'll probably create a new ticket.
Yep. And I got a few people creating new tickets, but the vast majority didn't even remember the question.
There you go.
Um, yeah, and then 2 years ago, I moved to my current team to be a data science tech lead. The team at the time was called Trusted Identity, um, and we do both like the identity verification. We're a platform team, so even though we own some of the product and front end facing components, we're mostly a platform team. So here we do a lot of A/B testing. We are doing some modeling work. We're doing dashboarding, ETL work. So a little bit of everything. But one of
Mhm.
the main things I was hired for is to drive data culture in the team and really push the team, all of our stakeholders, to use data pretty much all the time.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, I mean, I think when I saw your blog post about data culture, I thought it was actually very refreshing because a lot of the times data culture gets talked about more top down, but not as much of bottoms up. A lot of
Hmm.
data teams, because they have thousands of Jira tickets, they are told that they need to drive business value by creating dashboards and answering business questions. They don't necessarily feel encouraged to do more horizontal, more forward-looking type of work, like driving culture. So I thought it was really refreshing that you wrote a blog post about it. I'm curious whether that was when you were at the BI team that you started, and then, or was this starting from when you joined the trust and security team?
Uh, yeah, so I feel like for a data scientist, it's important to always drive data culture to some extent or the other. So I've had a tendency throughout my career to like gently plug myself anywhere I could, and make suggestions of like how we can use data, and that's one way to drive data. It's really
Mhm,
become an official mandate for me when I joined the identity team.
mhm.
To like really double down on it and not just gently make suggestions here and there.
Got it. Then tell me a little bit more about what it was like before and after. And maybe if you can give us a little bit of like a starting point of the identity team. Identity, this is for both the merchants or for the consumers that are doing the transaction for the merchant that you guys are providing more of that verification type of service?
So my team in particular does it just for merchants. We do it for consumers, but that's not part of my team.
But
Uh,
you're providing the verification for their customers.
uh, so my team doesn't do it. My team just makes sure that when merchants come to Square and they want to start processing, that we verify their identity.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Kind of like when you set up a bank account, the bank checks your SSN, all of that. We
Mhm.
have to do something similar at Square.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so when I joined the team, I was told that the team didn't really run many A/B tests. And one thing they would do is they would roll out new things. They would kind of think, oh, this is a better experience. And we had one dashboard with like all of our main metrics. And then they would just take a look at this dashboard and be like, okay, not much seems to be moving. This is all good.
Mm,
Um, Whereas when I came in, I made a suggestion from the get-go that we run an A/B test on something that we're rolling out at the time. I can't really remember what it was, but the thing had actually a statistically significant difference between the test and control. So we got lucky in some sense that it wasn't a neutral test, but we showcased that all around all of our PMs, and we said, hey, as a PM, you want to prove your value. Here is how we have done it. We have said that these are the metrics we're measuring, and we run this test after rolling out whatever it may be.
can you give us an example of what kind of test you ran? Like, is it to show like if we do it this way, then the processing time is much faster, or the way that merchant gets converted into like actual merchant in Square? Um, is it something related to that?
Yeah, so there's I can't go into a whole lot of detail about the things we test, but you can imagine that we're looking at different verification methods,
Mm,
that we're working with different vendors. One thing we've done in one of our markets is we did a test on the design and just change the UI to make it a little bit easier for merchants to find the relevant registration number that they need to share with us on one of their documents. So it's
got it.
things like that.
Very cool. And I guess
And
you might have already, or were you also defining any of the health metrics around the main KPI metrics that the team cares about?
so we had some of those metrics already defined. So we did a bit exercise where we revisited that, and we added a number of other metrics. So we would have like a main metric, and then whenever it moves, people would be like, "Well, why does it move?" And we wouldn't know. So we
Mm,
added all of this like leading indicators. We broke it
right.
down quite a lot, and we got to a point where we're pretty much every time something moves, we're able to explain it. Pretty well and say, hey, here's likely what's happening and
Mhm.
why.
Yeah, yeah, because they're kind of like correlated.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very neat. So, I guess how do you like define the data culture? Now you've kind of brought on these changes. Like, what is you mentioned about kind of some of the state of before, and what does it look like today?
Yeah, so at the moment, every time a PM puts a PRD, so product requirements document, every time engineering, or almost every time engineering puts the engineering design docs, all of them have data, all of them have metrics in it, all of them have logging in it,
Mm,
all of them kind of think about the data piece, which we didn't have before. One of the things that our head of product pointed out a while ago is we had an all hands, and she was like, hey, do you guys notice that right now, looking at the presentation, every single one of them has numbers and charts in it? We never used to have that before. So
mm,
that was one way that's a little more tangible to measure the impact. And one of the things that I was talking to my colleague on the team a while ago was that we just created a lot more work for ourselves. So now everyone wants to loop us in. Everyone wants data. Everyone wants some analysis. Everyone wants to test something out instead of just rolling it out. There's just a lot more interest in using data, doing things with data, or even simply measuring things that we do.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about how that started. In the beginning, a lot of people may be, okay, well, yeah, I want to be data driven. I'll use data. Like, I definitely want to see more. But I want answers now to like my other question. And as a data scientist or data analyst, you can help me answer that question uh, rather than me having to spend more time to try to explain all the things that's happening in business because that just takes longer time. I'm curious, what are the things that you've done when you when you think about teams that are trying to drive culture, data culture in their organizations? What are the things that you feel like they can start with and are really important for them to push for?
Yeah, so I think like even when I think about like how I started on team, there's like this balance of, building things out, making sure that something that's going to be time consuming is built up for the future, and tackling some low hanging fruit. Um, and the low hanging fruit, or like the kind of more like ad hoc requests, can be pretty distracting. So in my ideal world, I just ignore that and I just like take the path of doing something that's going to be time consuming but will benefit more. But it's really important to actually stop yourself and give your stakeholders something, provide some low hanging fruit, start providing some data, start proving some sort of ROI of data from the get go. So that they can start thinking about how to work with you, how to use data effectively. And for my team, I also ended up putting together a document that was like a vision and strategy for the team.
Mm,
And I used a crawl, walk, run framework.
mm-hmm.
And I kind of outlined, hey, here's where we are right now. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're going to head over the next year. And then beyond that, here is how I want us to function to be. And here is what I want us to do for the team. And I did multiple revisions of that. And then I ended up sharing that with all of the stakeholders and talking them through it. So I didn't just send them the link and said, hey, look at it when you have the time. I actually like chased them and made sure that we talked through that.
Okay, so your team, like your data science team, has an understanding of kind of like the future of where they will be and how they will be operating, but you also communicated and socialized that with your business stakeholders inside the company. You mentioned about PM, product managers, as being one of the stakeholders. What are some other stakeholders that you've also communicated this with during that time?
So engineers, mostly engineering managers, and also some engineering tech leads. So I feel like I got really lucky because all of the engineering tech leads that I have worked with were very data driven and data hungry.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so we have had some great collaborations with them. I also shared it with our designers. So one of the things that we started doing as part of this journey is working much closer with design. They do their own research. They go and talk to users. So it's like, how can we meet at the research part and do some work together as well?
That's really interesting. And also just the part that we don't always hear about, the collaboration with the design team or with design or like a user research team. Because usually we do hear about engineering is definitely one part that data gets used and measured, fairly straightforward. Product is another one. Product and go to market. There's like a clear, like a business metric that you need to drive and the KPIs to measure. How would that work on the, I guess, the design side? Is it really just trying to think through the implementation of how things will get measured if a product is designed in a certain way?
That's part of it. So we started working a lot more closely on like the implementation pieces, on designers kind of looking at the data, being curious about the data, being also somewhat metrics driven. And part of that was that the design team had a push to be more data driven that came from above. But the other side of it was that we started meeting with the design team once per month. And they would often share, hey, we're in the exploratory phase about this part of the experience. Like, we're talking to users, we're trying to learn more about their experience, we're trying to figure out if we want to revamp that. At which point I would say, okay, well, how can we also do this from the data perspective? What
Mm-hmm.
can we look into from the data side, and then kind of marry both sides,
Yeah.
both the UX research and data. And at one of my previous jobs, I was told that there is always a conflict between data and like user research. And I don't buy into that. I think we can work together. And there's been many times when I've pulled some data and I've seen that kind of this is where the story ends from the data side. And I would go and talk to the designers and ask them, hey, like in your user research, what have you learned about this experience? Here's what I'm saying with data. Here are some extra questions I have. The data cannot answer right now.
Right, for sure. There's both quantitative things and qualitative things that you would want to see, and I think that the data will help designers to be able to prioritize the areas of focus on diving in, yeah, as well as like may not be as important to focus on, and I think that's really helpful, uh, and being able to actually figure out how to measure certain behavior that they want to drive is also helpful. Uh, oh, that's great. So these are product engineering and design teams of your internal platform team, or are they your like internal customer teams? Since you're a
Uh,
platform team.
so most of them are my internal teams, not the internal customers. Although there is some work that happens with internal customers.
For sure. Um, Very cool. So I guess were there any particular like processes that you've kind of instituted after you created that like vision document and how it's going to happen? Started talking to others. What are other steps that followed after that to implement or to start really driving the data culture in the team?
Yeah, so a big step was making a case for metrics to be always included in the PRDs that I mentioned, making sure
Mm,
that metrics and logging is always included in EDDs for engineering. Um, for those things, I had to like make a case, talk to people about like changing our templates and things like
mm,
that. So that was a big process change that ended up being a forcing function to include metrics.
for sure.
Um, I also ended up creating another, we're very document heavy culture at Square. So that's why I'm talking
I
about a lot
see.
of docs. But I ended up, we've had some issues with A/B testing, whether the groups were not divided in the right way. Um,
Mm,
I ended up kind of, per advice of my then manager, creating a document on like what are some principles around A/B testing and how we should be thinking about this. Alongside, I added roles and responsibilities in A/B testing so that it was crystal clear what is product manager responsible for, what is a data scientist responsible for, what is an engineer responsible for, so that as we're doing these things, we're delivering them to good quality. Because running an A/B test is one thing. Running an A/B test where we properly randomize the samples, we have good data, we have data on like the control and test group, not just page views. That was a suggestion. Um, is really important. So just implementing those processes so that we know, and the team knows how to do it well and can reference that in the future. I mean, I put together this document almost 2 years ago, and I ended up sending it to someone 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So it's still very much in use.
Mhm.
Um, and we created expectations on how to work with data science. Um,
Mhm.
so to me, it was almost obvious, but people don't know how to work with data science. But there were a few people who like DM'd me and were like, "Hey, like at my previous company, we didn't have a data scientist. Like, can you tell me
Mm,
what you do?
yeah,
How we can work together?" Um, and that was great and very eye-opening to me, that I
yeah,
cannot just assume that I can
yeah. And
do
not
work with
everyone
this.
have that luxury of having a data scientist on hand that who can actually help define and implement the metrics and A/B tests. I think that's a really good point because I feel like a lot of stakeholders will have challenges of um, defining how to like represent this metric or like goal their OKRs in data, and in a way, coming from you and your team's point of view, uh, like you will have to also come to almost like a similar level of understanding in order to define that for them. How do
Mhm.
you, yeah, come together for doing that without feeling like, oh, we spent a lot of time talking, and then like we ended up with like, you know, still not so sure about like whether this represents like what we were trying to do.
Yeah, that's pretty tough. Um, so usually, we're at a point where I feel very lucky because I think my PMs are now in general like fairly data driven. So they usually take the first pass and think about
Mm,
what's important, and then I would share feedback. But it also happened that I would meet with a PM or a few PMs in the office, and we would kind of whiteboard. I like to
mm,
kind of whiteboard the steps of, okay, here's what we're doing. What is the end goal? What are the things in between that we care
mhm.
about? And what is the closest, even if it's imperfect, what's the closest way to indicate that? Um,
Yeah,
and at a company of our size, it's also like, okay, so what are the things that our team is exactly responsible for and can drive? So we are not signing up for other teams' metric, or something that could be heavily influenced by someone else.
for sure. So in order for the PM or any stakeholders to come up with metrics, um, or for you to suggest things, it's also important for them to have a good understanding of some data, what can be collected or measured, or how they can be measured. What are ways to kind of drive that literacy and understanding internally? Is there any thing you've instituted or tools that you guys rely on? And are these primarily just um, managed, like when you define the metrics, are they primarily managed in like docs and spreadsheets, or do they go into BI tools?
Yeah, so we use Looker. So that's where our dashboards live. And then we have internal documentation. We have this how-to data for our team document.
Mm,
That's where we define all of our metrics. Um, so exactly how they are calculated. That can get confusing for people. So it's a reference point. We also reference all of our past analysis, all our
mm,
dashboards, our ETL. So everything lives in that one place. It's a pretty heavy doc by this point.
mm,
But one thing I do is whenever we have a new stakeholder start on the team, um, especially for product managers, I sit
mm-hmm,
down with them and I go through our metrics.
mm-hmm. That makes
And
sense.
that's not like big training. That's a very much one-on-one session.
Yeah.
So for every single one of them, we're able to stop at the points that they are either more curious about, don't understand as much, have suggestions. We had a product manager start a few months ago who actually had a really great idea about something that we should be measuring, but we currently don't have a way of measuring. Um, and personally, I really appreciate that, to kind of challenge us and to think outside the box of, well, are there any other ways we could measure the thing that they are interested in? Is there any proxy? Can we implement logging? Or is this kind of like an idea that we should maybe keep for the future if we have the right um, tooling at some point?
That's really awesome. Um, and how often these metrics change? Is this something that you guys regularly revisit with product managers, or is it kind of up to the product manager once it's kind of instituted? Now there is like a certain standard ones and the health metrics. Is it up to the product managers and engineering teams to kind of like come up with new ones and revisit them, or is there things that the data science team also drives on that front?
Yeah, so we kind of we have a lot of conversations about metrics, and we have a very tight feedback loop with our, especially product managers, but really all of our stakeholders. We meet with our product managers on a weekly basis. We talk through all of the new initiatives, everything that's going on, and we talk about whether the metrics are still relevant or whether we should change them. So that's a conversation that I feel like it's happening almost constantly.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the data science team is who owns the metrics, so it's on
Mm,
us. And there are times when I've pushed back on suggestions where someone was suggesting that we calculate the metric we look at a little differently. Um,
mm,
Things like that, that I felt like is just gonna create unnecessary confusion for people.
right,
Um,
right,
because there is that balance of, yes, we can keep on refining them and making them like really, really precise, but at the end of the day, there was like a large group of people using these metrics,
right,
and we want to make sure that they use them well and consistently.
for
um,
sure.
so it's a balance that we're trying to strike. If anything, we're starting to add more metrics or look at different angles of things over time to understand the merchant experience.
Yeah. So as owner of metrics, I think you bring up a really good point regarding understanding of the metrics for everyone else so that they can use it correctly. And then there's also the part of data quality, making sure that the metrics actually represent, and when it gets looked up, it is the what was stated and defined and hence expected. Um, Maybe we can start on the data quality side. I know that you've also wrote a blog post about ETL documentation to drive data quality, which I haven't seen many times in other places. People put different comments in their pipeline code or DBT models, but I would love to for you to explain a little bit more of what that documentation entails. If it's like a kind of like a standard practice that your team follows.
um, yeah, so we built a lot of ETLs on the data science side. And at some point we need to make sure that they're reproducible, that they make sense, that they've been QA'd. And the quality really may vary as you kind of create a wild west of ETL. So um, we've had some different templates that ended up getting revised, but really the goal of the template is to encourage people to think through why they are building an ETL.
Mhm.
Um, and
Sorry,
sometimes
when you
that
say
may,
the
yeah.
quality varies, what do you mean by that?
um, I think especially with more junior folks, you may see that their ETL doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. So maybe duplicate
Oh,
rows, right? Simple
mm,
example. Um, Things like that. Or how do you make sure that your calculations are correct?
mm,
Or even as a consumer, you may assume, hey, this ETL is going to have XYZ that I'm looking for. and you consume it, and you start using it and running queries, and then you realize that this is not what you expect it to be.
Yep.
So the goal was to have something that forces you to think through what it is that you want your ETL to represent. And a lot of the time when I build an ETL, kind of, write it on a piece of paper and kind of think like, okay, here's what I need. Here's the rollup calculation. Here's the unique row of primary key that I care about and will be useful for me. But then I started putting that into an official document and sharing with the team and using that as documentation. Then that actually became a little more involved. And there was quite a few steps in it now. But there were a few times when I wanted to propose an ETL to unify a few data sources, to clean up some data. And I wanted to get a review on this idea before, I ended up spending 2-3 days doing the work, QAing it, all of that. So that's why there was like a reviewer section where we can share it with people and get their thoughts. And that can be another data scientist. Peer review is really important. We've shared that with engineers too, or even product managers sometimes, which is a pretty technical thing to share with them. But if they are going to be consumers, so some PMs can write their own queries and consume data that way. I want them to give me feedback on whether that's going to be useful for them. And so we outline like what is the goal of the ETL. So to really spell out exactly what it is that we're trying to build and why. I also have a non-goal section. So if there's something that you're intentionally omitting, not including, deciding not to have in your ETL, you can spell it out there so people are not asking about, hey, what happened to this part? Or have you considered something else? So you can explain that. And the section that I think it's more useful for PMs or other stakeholders is key analytics questions. So what kind of questions will this ETL allow you to answer much more easily than you can right now?
I see. The end result of the transformation, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and then we do things like spelling out the actual columns that will be, what kind of data type they will be. I like to include what's the source for the data so that if something goes wrong, we can track it. Any sort of description. So if there was an interesting transformation that can be included. But we also want to make sure that we spell out what makes a row unique, what's the primary key, whether it's a full refresh or it's an incremental table, what the output table is going to look like, where the data is coming from, things like that. And then one section that I really like is the data quality check. So even before you build this table, you have to think through, this is how I'm going to check that the data in this table is correct. So that can be comparing it to a different data source that's similar and kind of checking if the data is within the ballpark, making sure that like your primary key is working, making sure that your values are correct. This is really an open-ended section, but you should know how to check that your data is correct.
So the data quality checks, is it usually a form of implementation of like which monitors or tests that should run, or is it more of kind of like explanation of what columns needs to be checked how?
It can be either, as long as you do something. So yeah, it depends on your use case. But I have done both wherever each made sense, just to make sure that you're not putting garbage out in the world.
Yeah, I think I saw 4 sections: goals, key analytical questions, non-goals, and data quality checks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the non-goals part again?
Yeah, so sometimes when you are designing an ETL or
Mm-hmm.
doing any work, even if even when you think about like an analysis you're doing, you can't do it all, and you can't include all the data you want in the ETL.
Right.
Um, you kind of have one ginormous table with like every single data point possible ever. So non-goal section allows you to explain what you are skipping, what you are not trying to accomplish. It can be something that you are not interested in right now. It can be something that you're just not interested, period, for your use case. It can be something that you want to do in the future, but currently it's out of the scope. Um,
Yep.
so it's just a goal. The goal here is the goal of the non-goal section, no pun intended, is to get ahead of any questions that stakeholders
Mm-hmm.
or other people may have, and proactively answer them and let them know, yeah, I really thought through the implementation, what I'm doing here. This is why I'm not including whatever.
Yeah. Makes sense. Very interesting. Um, so you've now instituted this documentation to be included on all your ETL pipelines or for your team today. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so about how many are documented? Like, is this now like kind of like covering like all your pipelines, or are you still trying to kind of go through more kind of conversion of like what happened to the existing pipelines before?
Yeah, great question. Um, so for some of the existing pipelines that are not um, used heavily, or they're kind of running somewhere and powering some dashboard that we're not focused on right now, they're still undocumented. But I've been kind of trying to almost backfill some of the existing ETLs, especially if we use something heavily.
Mm,
um, or we're often asked, there's a few ETLs that we have that a lot of stakeholders ask on pretty regular basis, other teams ask about. So instead of repeating the same questions over and over again, I would go on like backfill the ETL design doc. Um, and then whenever I've been making changes to some ETLs, either fixing, changing timelines, adding columns, whatever it may be, I try to, and I don't always have the time, but I try to also carve out some time to fill out the document, link it out, to make sure that all of those things are documented. Um, and part of it is also for my own use case. I feel like those documents are a bit of a cheat sheet that I can then go back to and look at if I've forgotten something in the future.
yep, for sure. I think it comes in very handy and helpful, especially as your ETL pipe number of ETL pipelines just keep growing, and things will also build on top of each other. Is what I think what I see a lot. Data engineering. That's awesome. Um, cool. So like I guess like as we wrap up, I would love to learn a little bit more about kind of things that you're interested. Actually, before we wrap up, I think there was the other side of the um, uh, data culture around like literacy and having everyone to be able to find where things are. So beyond having kind of like the onboarding session for you to walk through the document and have the stakeholders to understand where to go, what these metrics mean, how they came about. How do you maintain like new additional metrics and other explanation to be discoverable and understandable by others today for your stakeholders? Is it just through those meetings, I guess weekly, monthly meetings? Um,
Um, so through those meetings, through adding things to the documentation, but also through Slack announcements,
mm,
um, and through quarterly all hands. So there's been all hands in the past where I had a 5-minute session for everyone on the team explaining,
mhm,
hey, we're adding this one thing. Here is what it means. Here is why it matters.
mhm,
Here is why we're doing that, to just explain
mhm.
it across the board.
That's awesome. And the Slack announcements, often do you make it? Is it kind of like once it's live, the metric is live, that's what when you post it? And what is part of the announcement?
Yeah, usually, so we have different Slack channels. So we have one just internal for like our broader team, and when something like a metric is added, we often put it there. We have another channel for our stakeholders. So anyone who's interested in our metrics, that's sometimes we post there too. A lot of the time, if like a metric goes up or down quite a bit, we try to get ahead.
The measure, the actual data value changes, you mean?
Yeah. So that's what we post there most of the time. But if there was like an announcement around a new metric or something, we can add it there too. So we have different avenues of posting that and sharing that with people.
Got it. That's really helpful because like you are like the owners of the metrics, you're already in data. So you are continuously noticing like any like major changes or big drop or increase, and to explain how like that happened. I think that's really awesome. That's super helpful for stakeholders to be aware of those.
Yeah. And one of the successes that I felt kind of happen is, I would talk about the metrics, post the updates. We ended up sharing like the automated looker reports with the team that get sent out every morning at 6 a.m. And we have quite a lot of stakeholders on the East Coast. So I always feel it's a big success when I come online 8, 9 a.m. Pacific, and there's already a message from someone, hey, I opened the report. This metric looks off. Like, what is going on?
Got it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, because of those automated reports, I think definitely gives them like a big picture. But then, like, not everyone always looks at the report because it just comes in every day, right? So,
Yeah.
I think that added explanation also is great. You shared a lot of really good points around how to make data culture more successful in organizations. Were there any approaches that when you like kind of like thought about or planned for, but didn't necessarily work out as well as you anticipated?
Great question. I think with a few of these, we had to like iterate and kind of, it's not always that the first version of an approach will be successful. I think especially when it comes to working with engineering, I feel like engineers often just have so many other priorities, fixing bugs, that having good data isn't always the top priority. So there, instead of always having like a bottoms up approach, I often had to make a case with the leadership to help us push for the right data, to make a case. And having that leadership buy-in helps a lot. So what I'm talking about, driving data culture bottoms up, the leadership buy-in does make it a lot easier. So when leaders at the company, leaders of your stakeholders, whatever, are encouraging using data or making data-driven decision, or even having a test and learn approach and testing, it just does make your life a lot easier. So if
it actually doesn't happen without leadership push, I think.
Yeah.
In many cases.
So yeah, just spending the time up front, getting leadership buy-in, surfacing problems in front of leadership. So we've had some data quality issues, and I got all of the engineering managers and tech leads in one room and talked them through them and explained why these were so painful, and how we had to create workarounds that we didn't know if they're going to be reliable long term and were very time consuming. And kind of had a call to action of how can we start fixing this. And the other thing is, you're never done driving data culture on the team. I kind of thought that it's going to be one and done, and then your stakeholders change, people leave, people get moved around, new people come on, and you need to keep on working on the same things over and over again, sometimes building up on it. but the work just kind of continues to evolve.
I think we got paused. I don't know if it's me or if it's Kasia. Oh, I think you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Oops.
Great. Yeah, you were saying how it needs to be iterative, and uh, so new people come on and keep people go.
Yeah, and you just continue doing some of the same things. Some of them you just keep on iterating. Some of them you just build up on and take them to a new level.
Mhm. So,
But the
is there
work never ends.
anything I would say now you are trying out at this time?
Uh, I think I'm trying to like push more interesting analytical ideas, more
Mm,
interesting, I don't know, statistical methods, modeling, and just trying to really push data science driven initiatives.
mhm.
And instead of us kind of almost supporting our stakeholders, I'm trying to turn it around and say, hey, here's some of the things that data wants to do. Can you help us? This is how you will benefit you as an engineering org, as a product. Um, in the future, but can we collaborate together?
Yeah,
And if I build this model, this is what it should do. So really showing the power of data at a more advanced level.
for sure. So today, how big is the data team? Like data science, I guess you have data engineers too, like supporting the trust team, like trust product engineering design.
So we currently don't have dedicated data engineers. We have like a platform team that kind of
Mm-hmm.
supports all of our platform needs. Um,
Oh, and then it's the data scientists that are building the ETL model, and then
Pretty
okay,
much,
you use the
yeah,
platform to
pretty much,
push that. Okay. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're a very small team. We're just a few folks, and then we roll up to a bigger Square Data org, and we work very closely with those folks.
I see. So, if like kind of almost like a maybe I'm just trying to get an understanding of like whether it's like about maybe 10% of the organization or like even less.
Do you mean 10% of like the whole data organization, or
Yeah,
like the whole
for
company?
trust the organization for your data science team.
Oh, oh, that's a great question. I feel like we're maybe even like 5% of their organization. Like we're
Okay.
we're a pretty small team.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because I feel like a lot of data teams do a lot, and they support so many stakeholders, or so many organization members. So that's why I thought I would ask. That's amazing. So yeah, as we wrap up, I would love to like hear from you. In the industry, there's a lot of changes happening. There are in the technologies, tooling, as well as how people work together, especially with AI. Curious to learn a little bit about things that you're excited about in from all these new approaches or trends coming up.
yeah, so I'm pretty excited about kind of that make data more self-serve or answer questions or anything like that. We're seeing some of that internally with the tooling, that when people ask questions, we have some AI that would like pull from the relevant documents and kind of
Mhm.
make sure that we're not answering the same questions over and over again. I'm excited for that to be the case for data. So often um, answering questions more about like business context, where to find data, especially for other data folks. So yeah, I'm excited about like that those kind of tools taking away the work from me that's just like answering questions, um, looking through the docs and just removing data scientists as bottlenecks, and allowing us to focus on more deep work. Um, I know that there's also been some issues with some of the like data specific tooling, that the argument against that is that you can ask for data, but are you really asking the right question? um,
Mhm.
which is something that data scientists help to filter. But I think there's many opportunities when it comes to like data scientists on other teams, business context, that AI can help us automate and answer um,
Yeah, I
and
feel
just
like
free up our
sometimes
time.
you actually get more data questions from other data scientists and other people that are actually more in the data. Do you feel that way as well?
Yeah. Yeah, it can be the case because they understand the nuance. So then they will ask like very detailed questions about the data. Also,
Right.
sometimes it happens that people just don't look through documentation, even though things are documented. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. There are too
so
many
if
things to read about. Well, you read it, but you don't remember anymore. So,
yeah, so I'm like, if AI can answer that, and I don't have to be like, hey, did you look at our documentation?
right,
Um, I'm fully on board with that.
for sure. Do you currently use any like AI internally for that purpose?
Yeah, so we have some internally built tools for that, and it's also interesting to see how it answers questions, but also whenever it doesn't get the right answer, people make sure that they feed it. The
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yes, so it's pretty cool to see different teams leverage that.
Got it. So that's a great way to also crowdsource to make sure that things are in the right place or it can be retrieved properly next time. Yeah, actually, like one of the I would say main use cases of like our Select-Star AI is also like falling into that side. A lot of
Hmm.
our users also use it actually just like directly on Slack. They ask a question on the data channel, but then like our bot will catch that as, oh, this is a question about data, like let me help answering that for you. And but then also like there's the side of for more technical or more data specific questions, how do I join these two tables,
Hmm.
or what is like the right way to query this table if I want this type of outcome. I think that's really like it's like a combination of utilizing both like structured, so your metadata, but also unstructured, your documentation data, which I think is a great use case of LLM and AI in general,
100%.
for sure. Awesome. Well, Katja, I don't know if there's anything else as an advice that you would like to share regarding driving data culture for the audience today.
I think my one piece of advice would be, if you can get leadership buy-in, it really, really helps if folks high up or up top are bought into this. It's totally okay to drive it bottoms up, and that's great. But yeah, getting leadership buy-in is helpful, and you need to lead by example. So take little wins, start small. Um, it all helps and build up um, on each other.
For sure. Is there a I guess, angle that you think works the best regarding getting leadership buy-in?
Oh, great question. It really depends on your leadership and your stakeholders, but ultimately what leadership is trying to do is drive business impact. So just taking it from the angle of, hey, here's how I can help you drive business impact, here's how you can use data to do it, here's how we can make more magic happen, can be pretty effective if they don't understand the value of data yet, or if they are not fully bought in yet, or if it's not their top priority.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Kasia, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot of great nuggets that you shared around driving data culture for everyone. So thank you again, and have a good weekend.
Thank you for having me. Have a great weekend as well.